So I'm in Winston, Salem, North Carolina, heading towards downtown. And this is a city with a population around 254,000 that's rising quickly. Just like many of the cities in the state of North Carolina, a lot of them have very quickly rising populations, which means the crime is soon to follow. It's 43% white here, 33% black, 17% Hispanic, and 3% Asian. So very diverse. And it's considered one of the most religious cities in North Carolina, which is just a little quick fact that I came upon. The economy here is mostly centered around healthcare too. And so far we are heading, let's see what direction we're heading in. People want to know what road we're on. We are heading west on East 5th Street towards downtown. So the average age here is 36, and 19% of the population of the adults are seniors. So about 1 in every 5 adults in Winston-Salem is a senior. And this is another city, like I've been finding in a lot of the cities in North Carolina, that the male-female ratio is off by a lot. It's 47% male here and 53% female. So if you're a guy and you're looking for a wife, this is a good place to go because there are way more women than there are men. They also have a 54% homeownership rate, which is 14% lower than the national average. But for larger cities, anytime it's over 50%, it's a good thing. Being over 50% helps keep the crime down. More people that have a stake in the city helps keep the crime down. And if you own your house as opposed to renting it, you're more likely to care about it than you would if you're just renting and you can move and be gone, you know, within days. The median home value here is $152,000, which is, I mean, that's pretty good for this day and age to have the average home value be $152,000. If you compare Winston-Salem to Greensboro, which is nearby, and Durham, which is also kind of, those three are kind of all kind of close together in a way. Durham was the most expensive. Greensboro was just more expensive than this, but not by a lot. But this is the lowest as far as home value of the three, at least the way that it's listed. The median rent here is $827 a month, which is 13% below the national average. That's also cheap. It's kind of similar to what it was in Greensboro, but a lot cheaper than Durham. Durham was like at $1,100, I think. And Greensboro, I think, was closer to $900. It was still in the 800s, but closer to $900, I think. The average income here is around $40,000, and they have an 18% poverty rate, which is kind of typical. 1 out of every 5 people live below the poverty line here, around that amount anyway. They have a 39% marriage rate, which is slightly better than most cities are, but still not necessarily all that good. 56% of the people that live here were born here, and that number is low just because their population is rising so quickly that there's just so many people moving in that didn't grow up here. And 10% of the population is foreign born, but foreign born citizens. And they show 7% of their population being non-citizens, which if you watch my videos, I always say take that number with a grain of salt because nobody really knows. And there's really no way to get an accurate number of that. There's literally no way they can get an accurate number of that. So the homicides here were in the 20s pre-2020. They have 20 a year. That's super good number for a city of this size. But since 2020, they're in the 30s. So just like a lot of cities, the homicides went up in 2020 and after and continued to go up or stayed the same. And a lot of times the cities started going down by now. You know, they went up in 2020, 2021, 2022, and then they started coming down, and they haven't come down. They've still stayed kind of right up in that same range. Trying to look, this is kind of a duds of a ville so far of a downtown. I'm looking up and down these streets for one that kind of looks like something that would have something interesting to drive by. So their murder rates are in the low teens, which is good. Anything that's around 10 is just regular city stuff. They're slightly above that, but basically for the size of this city, they're doing pretty good. The assault rates pre-2020 were like in that 600 to 800 range per 100,000 people. And since and including 2020, it's been in the thousands. So their assaults went way up. Their murders went up quite a bit, and their assaults also went way up. This road has hope. What's on this road? No, that doesn't look all that. Let's just keep going straight on this road. So since 2020, their assault rates have been in the thousands. Now, Baltimore, which is a city that has high assault rates, is in the low 900s. And that's per 100,000 people. So being in the thousands means the assaults here, the assault rate here is higher than that of Baltimore. And when I talk about assault rates and murder rates, I mean it's based on your population. So you can compare two cities. You can compare Baltimore and Winston-Salem by their assault rates based on the population easier than you can by just saying, oh yeah, Baltimore has this many and Winston-Salem has this many, so Baltimore must be worse. That this compares apples and apples, and based on the population, the assault rate here is higher than that of Baltimore. The violent crime here is 218% higher than the national average, and anything in that like 80 to 100% worse than the national average is pretty much where I show, or where I would say is regular city stuff. If you're in that 80 to 100,000 range, so if you're, or 80 to 100% higher range, so being 218% higher, that's getting into that iffier category, where it's not necessarily a no-go zone, it's not necessarily a deal breaker if you want to move there, but it's getting up there. And if you were to move to a city that the assault rate was that high, or the violent crime rate was that high, you would want to know that the city had a handle on it and that it wasn't going to get worse before you move there, because it's kind of teetering. That's kind of a teetering spot of where it's between where it's not so good to where it's just bad. And property crime comes in at 99% higher than the national average. So that's, you know, right around that regular city bad stuff for property crime. The amount of crime you'd expect to see in a city. And it ranks in the bottom 10% for crime in America. Your odds of becoming a victim of a crime are 1 in 20, which is higher odds than what you probably would want it to be, but it's not too bad. And the year over year, see, this is where things start getting bad. The year-over-year crime increase is showing an increase of 33%. That's huge. That's a huge number to have an increase of. And you do that for a couple of years and the city's got problems. So right now it's already on that questionable level of crime, questionable level of violent crime especially, where you're right on that edge. If they can pull it back, it'll be fine. If it continues in the wrong direction, it'll start becoming a really bad city. And this is 33% is a huge increase to have in just 1 year. The cost of living here, though, is better than the national average, so it's cheaper, or at least on par with the rest of the country. Their schools in the entire state of North Carolina are bad. Here in Winston-Salem, they graduate, 35% of the students graduate proficient at reading and math. So slightly better than 1 out of every 3 graduate proficient at a 12th grade level for reading and math. The state of North Carolina is 43%, and the U.S. is, yes, 48%. The U.S. is horrible. They're not teaching the kids anything. The state of North Carolina is worse than the American average, and Winston-Salem is worse than even both of them, which is also a sign that a city can go bad fast. If you're not graduating people that can go get good jobs, your crime's going to go up. If you're not graduating kids that can, count back change at McDonald's, your crime's going to go up. If that's the level of people that are coming out of the high schools, your crime is going to go up. They do have a ton of people moving in here, but the people that are growing up here are the ones that are the solid base of the city, and they're not learning anything. Not in the schools, they aren't. %83 of the people that live here completed 8th grade. And 82% have a high school diploma. Must be the bad part of town, because all of this is boarded up and closed. This must be the bad edge of downtown. That's where the graffiti starts too. Still, the street is kind of clean. There's not garbage everywhere. This whole state actually has been pretty good about, at least of what I've seen, about keeping the cities clean. But you don't see garbage everywhere. There's not a ton of homeless people. The roads are actually worse here than both Durham and Greensboro were. These roads are for sure. Of the 3, if you're looking to move to this area of North Carolina, which, by the way, if you've never been to North Carolina, this is a very beautiful state. I mean, there's trees everywhere once you get out of the city. It's very beautiful. I mean, I guess depending on what you think beautiful is, but it's a very beautiful state. Of the 3, Durham, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem. Durham is probably the more expensive of the 3, but probably the nicest of the 3. This one, Winston-Salem, has the highest violent crime rate of the 3. It's also the cheapest of the 3. And the roads aren't as good. The other 2, the roads were better. The schools are basically the same, all 3 of them. Not one was any better than the other. If you move to any of these cities in North Carolina, literally any of them, North Carolina is a hot spot. People want to move there. All the cities are rising in population. All the larger cities anyway are rising in population. If you want to move to one and you either have or plan to have kids, check out the schools, because the schools are not teaching your kids anything here. You want to know that you're sending your kid to a school that they're going to learn something, and the schools are there. It's just nowhere near all of them by any means. The majority of them are not going to teach your kids anything. But this is, I mean, all three of those cities that, again, they're kind of all right by each other in a way. All three of them have been relatively clean. There's pockets here and there that, you know, like we just drove through that one pocket of Winston-Salem where the one block was all boarded up and, you know, bars on everything and graffiti. But for the most part, all three of them, at least the areas that I personally saw, the city was well kept. The city cares about the city and keeps it clean. There wasn't graffiti everywhere, except for here in Winston-Salem. The roads were decent. Greensboro had a lot more homeless than I saw in Winston-Salem or in Durham. But each of them has something to offer. Like this one would be the cheapest one to move to if you wanted to buy a house. What is this guy doing? Is he even... Oh, he does have shorts on. He's wrapping a blanket around his waist, and I'm like, is this dude walking with a robe and a blanket around his waist with no nothing covering his junk? But he's got shorts on. It just didn't look like it. They do this weird thing with these fences out here too. I don't know if you could see that. That one's too low to see. Up that road, they do this weird thing. It's got like this Gettysburg type of fencing. I don't know, for whatever reason, it makes me think of Gettysburg. But a lot of the fencing is these wood fencing that, I don't know, it makes me think of Gettysburg. I don't know why. But it's a decent city. We're going to drive just a little bit further. See if we come across anything else. This is also the smallest of those three. Greensboro was, I think, 304,000 people, and Durham was about 300,000. And this one, I think, it was 254,000, somewhere in around that. So I'm going to drive around this loop so you guys can see this fencing that I'm talking about. Because this fencing, they have this fencing all over the place here. You see this fencing right here that we're going by? I don't know why it's like that. It seriously reminds me of something. I must have seen something when I was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, that looked like that, because whatever that fencing, every time I see it, it makes me think of Gettysburg for some reason. But yeah, all three of these, everybody's moving here to North Carolina. It is a beautiful state. And any of these three cities that I just talked about, Durham, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem, which is where we're at right now, all of them have their positives. This one's the cheapest of those three. Durham's the most expensive of the three, but kind of seemed like the nicest of the three. Greensboro was kind of just in the middle of the two. This one, Winston-Salem's the most dangerous. Durham was the safest. Greensboro was kind of in the middle of the two. And that's kind of how it ranks with all of them. But any of them would be a good place to move. None of them are overly bad. This one is definitely on that teetering. If you're thinking of moving here, look into the crime a little closer. Make sure this is a city that properly reports their crime, because their numbers are already high, and if they're not properly reporting the crime, then it means the numbers are even higher. In a lot of cities nowadays, they don't thefts, they don't even charge people beyond a certain dollar amount. I mean, unless you hit a threshold, they won't even charge. The police won't even show up for some of it. Now, I don't know that that's the case here, but those are things that, if you're thinking of moving here, you have to kind of look into, especially this one, Winston-Salem, because it's already teetering on that edge. And if they're smudging the numbers at all, it could be way worse than what I just told you. But I'm gonna just let this play out a little bit. It wasn't the most exciting video to look at. The downtown wasn't very interesting. It was kind of cute in spots, I guess, but we'll let this play out a little bit, and hope you enjoyed this drive through Winston-Salem, North Carolina.